It was the last hour of Halloween night, and Mrs. Thompson was about to turn off her porch light. She'd had a long night of handing out candy. Just as she reached for the switch, there was a knock at the door. Odd, she thought. It was too late for trick-or-treaters. She peeked through the window and saw a small child standing on her porch, wearing a plain white mask and a faded, tattered costume. The child was alone, staring directly at her. Mrs. Thompson opened the door while confronting the scary boy. She asked, "Well, aren't you a little late, sweetheart? But here, have some candy." Mrs. Thompson nervously asked, "Where are your parents?" The child tilted its head, slowly, almost curiously, and took a step closer. Suddenly, Mrs. Thompson noticed something she hadn't before. The mask wasn't a mask at all. The eyes behind it weren't painted, they were deep, empty sockets. A cold dread washed over her, and she stumbled back, slamming the door shut. Then came the sound, soft at first, a quiet tapping. Someone knocking at the door harshly. At the same time Mrs. Thompson's phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking her paralysis. Unknown message came, "Let me in." Her blood ran cold. She looked back at the window, but the child was gone. Mrs. Thompson exhales in shaky relief, but then her phone buzzes again. Another message appears, "I'm inside." Mrs. Thompson's heart raced as she scanned the room, her eyes darting to every shadow and corner. She clutched her phone tightly, her fingers trembling as she dialed 911. Officer asked, 911, "What's your emergency?" "There's someone in my house," Mrs. Thompson whispered, her voice barely audible. "A child? But it's not a child. Please, send help." Office said, "Stay calm, ma'am. Officers are on their way. Can you find a safe place to hide?" Mrs. Thompson ran into the kitchen, slamming the pantry door shut behind her and locking it. She pressed her back against the door. Minutes felt like hours as she waited, her ears straining to catch any sound. Then, she heard it, a soft scratching at the pantry door, followed by a whisper, "Let me in." Tears streamed down her face as she clutched her phone, praying the police would arrive soon. The scratching grew more insistent, the whispers more urgent. "Let me in, Mrs. Thompson. I just want to play." Before she could react, she heard the soft patter of tiny feet on the hardwood floor behind her. She heard child whispering, and the last thing she heard before the darkness consumed her was the child's whisper. Suddenly, the sound of sirens pierced the night. The officers rushed to her side, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. They searched the house thoroughly but found no trace of the Mrs. Thompson. Suddenly officer's phone buzzed one last time. He looked down to see a final message, "Officer, I just want to play."